Hey everyone, ready for a deep dive? We're tackling some seriously big questions today. Moral freedom and responsibility.
Yeah, some heavy stuff.
You guys sent in these amazing audio lectures that go deep into free will, like mixing philosophy and neuroscience.
They're really
We're
fascinating.
going to be wrestling with some tough questions like, do we actually have free will?
In a deterministic universe.
Exactly. What can neuroscience teach us about how our brains make choices? And how do we balance individual freedom with keeping society safe, especially when it comes to crime?
I'm ready to get my mind blown.
Me too. These lectures don't mess around. They bring together these big philosophical ideas and connect them to real-world situations and the latest research.
Totally. It's not just theory. They make you really think about how your brain works and what that means for how we judge ourselves and others.
Right.
One of the things that really got me thinking was this idea that neuroscientists might be able to predict our choices before we even know we're making them.
Yeah, that one's a bit freaky, isn't it?
It kind of freaks me out. It definitely challenges our sense of free will.
For sure.
One of the most famous studies in this area is Benjamin Libet's experiment from back in 1985.
Oh, yeah?
He used EEGs to monitor brain activity and found that certain brain signals, or called readiness potentials, they actually happened before people were even aware of making a decision.
Whoa, so my brain is already making a decision before I even know it. Does that mean, like, I don't really have free will?
That's the question, isn't it? Libet's findings and later studies using fMRI really got people talking.
Not bad.
It's tempting to think these results mean our choices are already made for us.
Yeah.
But there are other ways to look at it, too.
Okay.
One idea is that our brains don't work as one big thing, but as a bunch of different networks,
Hmm.
each with its own preferences.
Oh, so it's not just one me making the decision, but like a bunch of mini-me's in my head all voting on what to do.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
Uh-huh.
The decision-making might be happening subconsciously in these different networks way before your conscious mind knows about it. It's still your brain, but the idea of a single you in control might be more complicated than we thought.
That's so trippy. So if those mini-me's are arguing it out in my subconscious, is there any point where my conscious mind can step in and change the decision? Like slam on the brakes?
That's a great question. And yeah, there is. It's called free won't. And it means we can consciously stop ourselves from doing something even after that initial impulse.
So I do have some power.
Yeah, you do. A study in 2007 by Marcel Brass and Patrick Haggard showed that a specific part of the brain, the left dorsal frontomedial cortex, it becomes active when we decide to stop ourselves from doing something.
So even if there's a lot going on under the hood, I still have a say in the final decision.
You've got the final veto power.
Phew, that's a relief. But then you have those situations where people act impulsively or even violently, and it seems like they have no control.
Hmm.
The lectures talk about some pretty intense examples of psychopathy and how it relates to crime.
Right. They go into some chilling descriptions of a murderer and a pedophile and how their urges felt impossible to control.
It's scary stuff.
It really makes you think about the darkest parts of human nature and how much responsibility people really have for their actions.
Yeah, it's heavy. But the lectures also say that psychopathy isn't just one thing, it's more like a spectrum, right?
Exactly.
Not everyone with psychopathic traits ends up committing crimes.
Definitely. Understanding that spectrum is key. There are tools like Robert Hare's psychopathy checklist
Okay.
to help figure out how severe someone's psychopathic traits are, with things like being callous, lacking empathy, impulsivity.
There was that fascinating story about the neuroscientist James Fallon, who found signs of psychopathy in his own brain scan.
Oh, yeah.
But he's not a criminal, he's a successful scientist.
He is, and his family did say he shows some typical psychopathic traits.
That's so wild. Makes you think about how nature and nurture work together.
Absolutely.
It really makes you wonder if our brains are wired a certain way, or if we go through trauma early on, how much does that actually affect our choices and our behavior? The case of Charles Whitman, the UT Austin clock tower shooter, comes to mind. His autopsy showed he had a tumor pressing on his amygdala, part of the brain linked to emotions.
Right.
That case and others like it really show how complicated the link is between brain abnormalities and whether someone is actually guilty of something.
It's a tough question.
If damage to a specific part of the brain or some childhood trauma plays a role in violence, how do we decide who's responsible?
It's a question legal systems have been dealing with forever, and neuroscience just adds another layer of complexity.
It feels like we're only beginning to understand how much control we really have over what we do. Speaking of control, let's talk about justice and how we react when someone wrongs us. Be honest. Have you ever imagined getting revenge on someone who hurt you?
Uh,
I know I have.
Yeah, I think most people have at some point.
Right. It's like a natural human reaction.
It is. It's pretty common, actually. David Buss, a psychologist who studies evolutionary psychology, found that 91% of people have had homicidal fantasies at some point in their life.
91%. Seriously, that's way more than I would guess.
Wow.
What makes people have these revenge fantasies?
Well, Buss's research suggests that jealousy and fear of loss are big triggers. Imagine someone stealing your partner or threatening your job.
Oof. Yeah, I can see that.
Those situations tend to make people feel angry and want to get even. But luckily, most people don't actually act on those feelings.
That's good. But it does show how deep that need for justice runs in us. And these lectures don't shy away from the darker side of that instinct.
Yeah, they talk about some pretty stark examples of justice in hunter-gatherer societies based on the work of anthropologist Christopher Boehm. There's this one chilling story about a man named Twy who was executed by his community because they saw him as a threat. It makes you think about how our ideas of justice have changed over time.
Big time. It makes you appreciate how complex our modern legal systems are. We've moved away from just punishing people, and now we try to understand justice in a more nuanced way.
Right, the idea of restorative justice is becoming more popular now.
Restorative justice.
Yeah, it focuses on fixing the harm and helping the offender and victim reconcile instead of just punishing the offender.
So how does that actually work? What are the key parts of it?
One of the big names in restorative justice is Howard Zehr. He says victims have 4 basic needs that this approach tries to meet: information, truth-telling, empowerment, and restitution.
Okay.
So victims need to understand what happened, why it happened, and have a voice in dealing with the harm they've suffered.
It makes sense. I'm thinking of the O.J. Simpson trial. The criminal trial was all about figuring out if he was guilty and then punishing him. But the civil trial where the family sued him felt more like they were trying to get some kind of restoration, at least financially.
That's a good example of how different legal processes can reflect different approaches to justice. But these lectures don't just look at the present, they take us into the future too, exploring how technology might change our understanding of justice and morality.
Now, that's what I call a deep dive. Speaking of diving into the future, the lectures introduce this concept called protopia, which sounds pretty interesting.
It is. It's a term coined by futurist Kevin Kelly.
Okay.
Protopia, unlike utopia, isn't about reaching some perfect ending. It's about recognizing that progress happens gradually. It's a process of achievable steps toward a better future. And Kelly says technology, not ideology, is what drives this progress.
So things like the internet, online education, 3D printing, all these incredible innovations that are already changing the world.
Exactly. And there's more. The quantified self-movement, personalized medicine, artificial intelligence. These advancements are leading us toward a future with more abundance and possibilities. Peter Diamandis, in his book Abundance, argues that we're on the verge of being able to give everyone on the planet a good quality of life.
Wow, that's a big claim. But I can see how technology is making things more affordable and accessible. Like food is cheaper than ever, and we have information at our fingertips.
Exactly. And this brings us to a truly mind-blowing idea: cloud countries. The brainchild of tech thinker Balaji Srinivasan. He imagines a future where virtual communities made possible by technology go beyond geographical borders. Imagine nation-states disappearing and being replaced by self-governing communities that are tailored to the specific needs and values of their members.
That's some next-level thinking. So I could join a cloud country of fellow podcast enthusiasts no matter where I actually live in the real world.
Exactly. And the lectures even lay out a framework for these future communities, the Justice and Freedom Dozen. It's like a set of core principles for a free and just society in the digital age. Things like democratic governance, rule of law, individual liberty, and a fair judicial system, but reimagined for a world without borders.
Okay, this is starting to sound a bit like science fiction, but incredibly fascinating nonetheless.
Yeah.
But let's be real for a second. There's a big issue that we can't ignore when talking about the future, even a technologically advanced one: income inequality. The gap between the rich and the poor is a huge problem, and it seems to be getting wider all the time.
You're right. It's a complex issue with no easy answers. And the lectures do acknowledge the problem of income inequality, but the data they present might surprise you. While it's true that the richest individuals and corporations are getting wealthier, it's also true that the poor and middle class are seeing improvements in their standard of living. It's a nuanced reality. Yeah, the work of economists like Gary Burtless and Thomas Piketty, they shed light on this. We need to think about the difference between relative wealth like how much you have compared to others, and absolute wealth, your overall standard of living.
Okay.
Global poverty rates have gone way down in recent decades, and even those considered below the poverty line in developed countries, they have access to stuff that used to be considered luxuries.
So even though the gap between the super rich and everyone else might be growing, everyone is actually better off overall. That's not the doom and gloom you usually hear about inequality.
Right, it's not so simple.
But it still makes me wonder, why do we care so much about inequality if everyone's standard of living is getting better? It's like we're programmed to compare ourselves to others, even if we're doing okay.
Our brains are still catching up to this abundance thing.
Uh-huh.
You could say we're running on outdated folk economics, as the lectures call it.
Folk economics, I like that.
Our evolutionary history made our brains focus on differences in status and resources, because for most of human history, those differences meant life or death.
So we're stuck in a scarcity mindset, even though we live in a world of plenty. Our brains need a software update.
Exactly. And this connects to some of the alternative economic models they talk about in the lectures, like John Mackey's idea of conscious capitalism. It challenges those traditional profit-first models and emphasizes creating value for all stakeholders, employees, customers, suppliers, the community, the environment, not just shareholders.
It sounds like a more well-rounded and sustainable way to think about business and economics. It's not just about making as much money as possible, but about creating a system that benefits everyone.
Right. And it reflects a bigger theme that runs through all these lectures, the idea that moral progress isn't about reaching some perfect endpoint. It's an ongoing journey. We're always changing as individuals and as a society, and our understanding of morality changes too.
That's a pretty hopeful way to look at it. It's not about reaching some perfect moral state, but about always trying to be better, learning from our mistakes, and building a more just and compassionate world.
I think so. And these lectures really highlight how important it is to understand our brains, our instincts, the things that shape how we act if we want to navigate this moral journey. It's about moving past simple ideas of good versus evil and really grappling with how complex humans are. We're capable of amazing kindness and terrible cruelty.
Yeah, that's deep.
It's up to us to choose which path we take.
So listener, as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm left feeling both amazed and like I have a responsibility.
Yeah.
We've gone deep into some mind-blowing ideas about free will, justice, the future of morality.
Right.
But the question that really sticks with me is this. If you could create your own protopian community, what would it look like? What values would it have? How would you balance individual freedom with the well-being of the whole group?
It's a question worth thinking about.
For sure.
Because the future of morality isn't something that just happens to us. It's something we build through the choices we make, the things we do, our commitment to creating a better world. And understanding how our biology, our technology, and our values all work together can help us shape that future in a direction that's more compassionate and ultimately leads to everyone flourishing.
I love that we're not just along for the ride. We're actually shaping our own moral destiny. And on that note, listener, we encourage you to keep exploring these questions, challenge your own assumptions, and keep working to make the world a little better every day. We'll put links to some of the research and resources from these lectures in the show notes. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing.
It's more like everyone is getting richer, but some are getting richer faster.
Right.
But even with that, the data shows that the poor and the middle class are still seeing their standard of living go up.
That is surprising to hear. I feel like the message is always that things are just getting worse for everyone but the super rich.
Yeah, it's important to look at the whole picture, not just the extremes. The lectures talk about the work of economists like Thomas Piketty,
Okay.
who argues that we need to be careful about how we measure inequality. He says we should focus on absolute wealth, meaning the actual goods and services people have access to, not just their relative wealth compared to others.
So even if the gap between the richest and the poorest is wider, everyone is still better off in terms of their actual living conditions.
That's the idea. And the data seems to back that up.
But if everyone is getting better off, then why does it feel like inequality is such a big problem? It's like we can't help but compare ourselves to others.
I think that's part of human nature. We're wired to notice those differences.
It's like even if I get a raise, I'm still going to be bummed out if my coworker gets a bigger one.
Right. It's not just about the money itself. It's about our place in the pecking order.
So even if I'm objectively better off, I still might feel worse off if others are pulling ahead of me.
Exactly. And the lectures talk about how our brains are kind of stuck in this old way of thinking. They call it folk economics.
Folk economics.
Yeah, it's the idea that our brains evolved in a world of scarcity where resources were limited.
Yeah.
So we're naturally very sensitive to any differences in wealth or status because those differences used to mean a lot more for survival.
So even though we live in a time of abundance, our brains are still acting like we're fighting over scraps.
In a way, yeah. It's like we're running old software in a brand new world.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So how do we update our software? How do we move past this scarcity mindset and focus on what really matters?
That's a big question, and I think there are a lot of different approaches. The lectures mention some alternative economic models, like John Mackey's idea of conscious capitalism.
I've heard of that.
It's about shifting the focus away from just maximizing profits and towards creating value for all stakeholders, employees, customers, the community, the environment, everyone involved.
It sounds like a more holistic approach to business.
It is, and it's about recognizing that we're all interconnected and that our actions have ripple effects.
It's not just about me versus you, it's about us working together to create a system that benefits everyone.
Exactly. And I think that's a key takeaway from these lectures. It's not about finding the perfect solution or achieving some ultimate moral utopia. It's about recognizing that we're all on this journey together and that we need to keep learning, growing, and striving to create a better world.
It's like that saying, progress, not perfection.
Right. And that progress requires us to understand ourselves, our motivations, our limitations. And it requires us to be open to new ideas, new ways of thinking, new ways of being.
It's challenging, but also really exciting.
Definitely. These lectures have given us a lot to think about, and I hope they've sparked some curiosity in our listeners, too.
Me too. So listener, if you've been grappling with these big questions about free will, responsibility, the future of justice, you're not alone. We're all trying to figure this out together. And the more we understand ourselves and the world around us, the better equipped we'll be to create a future that we can all be proud of.
I completely agree.
So keep those brains buzzing. Keep asking those tough questions and keep searching for those answers. We'll put links to some of the resources mentioned in the lectures in the show notes so you can continue your own deep dive. And until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep striving to make the world a little bit better every day.